All right, cool. I guess we'll go ahead and begin. So today I'm going to be talking about effective altruism and how to help out and do your part to be a model citizen of planet Earth. So what's the best social cause that you can probably think of? Some people might say, I don't know, eliminating poverty. Some people might say stopping cancer forever. Sure, these are all great questions, and we should probably be thinking about them. But so let's do a small thought experiment before we get going here. If you had 1,000 crowns and you could spend it, and you knew that this 1,000 crowns could help one person or it would help 20 people, which is the better choice? Well, if you're anything like me, I would probably say helping 20 people for the cost of one is probably better. So in which case we have like a baseline metric that we can work with to determine what's a good way to help out. So if we think about this idea of there being a ton of plastic in the oceans, and this is a huge problem, environmental catastrophe, what do we do to help this? Well, to make it matters even worse, there's a thing called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, where because of all the different currents that are in the Pacific Ocean, they all tend to convene in this one place. And there is a huge collection of garbage and plastic that is 1.6 million kilometers squared, just floating in the Pacific Ocean right now. So how big is that really? Well, if you think of it in terms of Europe, it's about that big. So this entire thing, this huge mass of plastic is the size, it's bigger actually than Spain and France and Germany combined, floating in the ocean. And obviously, this is terrible, right? We should try to fix this. So what do we do? Well, there's been some things, like people have been talking about getting rid of single-use plastics. You know, you've seen kind of this big push to use, say, paper straws or something like that. And you can see the logic in it. You know, it's using this plastic one time. Why would you do it? I mean, okay, it makes it a little bit more convenient for you to drink your cocktail if you're out at a bar on Friday night. But in the end, it's kind of wasteful and it's kind of unnecessary. And also, there's something that just feels a bit kind of right about giving up something in order to help. You know, if nothing else, it's sort of like a badge of honor and this feeling of like, yeah, I did my part. But if you think about it, if you look at the numbers, straws only make up 0.03% of all of the plastic in all the oceans in the world. And so let's say if everybody were to completely get on board with this and everybody were to do their part and not use straws, we would only reduce ocean plastic by 0.03%. Not so great. But so what is the biggest amount of plastic that's in the ocean? Actually, it's discarded fishing gear. So whenever fishermen go out and they use the fishing gear, if their nets rip or something like that, oftentimes they usually just dump it in the ocean, and that sucks. It actually accounts for 46% of all of the plastic that's in the ocean. And actually each year, blue crabs alone in the number of 1.25 million are killed by these, you know, for instance, crab pots that are just left there, discarded. And so obviously this is a big problem, probably much bigger than, you know, plastic straws. But skipping the whole plastic straw thing when you're at the bar, like I said, kind of feels right? It feels like you're doing something personally. And also on top of it, there's probably this feeling of sacrifice. And because we're in the West and we have these sort of old Christian ideals, sacrifice is equated with goodness. And that's all well and good, but it's only 0.03%. It's not really helping that much. So what's the better thing to do? Well, you could reduce how much seafood you eat. If you were to do that, then it would decrease the demand on fishing, the fishing industry in general. Or you could contact your local representative in parliament and try to get them to put, say, international pressure on the fishing industry to maybe adopt better practices or better regulation. Or you could have them try to increase the funding into plastics research, you know, to find better biodegradable nets that would happen. And this would probably be a lot more effective than you just not getting a straw whenever you have your Mai Tai. So you're probably thinking, a lot of you, like, haha, what a bunch of fucking assholes, right? Oh, sorry, maybe that was a bit too expletive. But what a bunch of idiots, right? I mean, over here with your plastic straws, whatever. Well, I have to say, if you're thinking that, then congratulations, you're a jerk. Because the point isn't that we shouldn't try to make people feel bad for trying to do something right. Sure, maybe it's not the most effective way, but we should probably be trying to applaud people who are at least trying to do something good. Could they be less self-righteous about it? Yeah. And honestly, like, that's one of the things that really pisses me off about a lot of activists, is that they feel kind of self-righteous, and that sucks. But unless you're doing something that's more effective than they are, then you don't really have a right to talk. I mean, did you contact your representative to do more? Because that's probably more effective than, skipping your straws. Did you do it? Nah, you probably didn't. And I didn't either. But the point is, we want to find a way together, right? So we can find a way to make a better path forward into the future of humanity, right? So why don't we work together then? But this really does show that our emotions can be deeply misleading. So another example we have here is, let's say you're a doctor, you're in the US, and you have a choice. You could either go in the typical career path, you can make a private practice and, probably make a pretty sweet paycheck, making a lot of money helping rich people. Or you could go work for an NGO or a charity and helping malnourished children. Which one's better? Well, especially when you see heart-touching images like this, or heart-wrenching images rather, you think, well, I mean, what kind of monster would you be to go and make a huge amount of money while there's children like this that are dying in the world? It's greedy, for one, and also, it's really just the right thing to do to help out. However, if you think about it, if this doctor doesn't go and volunteer, there's probably another doctor who would take his place. Also, the amount of money that a doctor usually makes in the US is about $200,000 a year, which is a lot. So what if this doctor were to say, you know what, I'm gonna go make a lot of money and I'm gonna go and donate at least half of it to a charity, the same NGO that I would have worked for. That's $100,000 a year that this NGO is now getting that it didn't get before. And more than likely, the next doctor probably wouldn't have done that because nobody thinks to do this usually. And in the end, this amount of money could have hired a doctor there to work in the NGO probably, and it may have even hired more, or it could have helped staff to further help scale out and really tackle the problem. So this is kind of at the heart of the matter, right? Because if this doctor goes in to work for an NGO, that's all well and good, but if they get better and better and they become a world-class doctor, that's great, but they're probably not going to get that much better at helping more patients all at once. Maybe he can do his surgeries like really fast, and he can maybe help 2 patients a day instead of 1, and that's all nice. But if he were to go on working and make a lot more money and charging more money, he could then go and donate that money that could hire more doctors, which would scale much more effectively than just him trying to help on his own, or her on her own. Let's be PC here, guys and girls. All right, so how do we contribute, really? I mean, we can all agree it's good to help out. That's great, that's nice. So is it good for us to volunteer? Yeah, sure, of course. Like I said, we're not gonna make you feel bad for trying to do something good. If you wanna volunteer, that's fantastic. Please do that. Also, in the end though, if you are volunteering, there is still this problem of scale, right? I mean, you can get better at sorting cans at your local food drive. You can get better at giving out smiles to children in the hospital. That's really good. But again, you're still just one person. And even if you get really good, maybe you'll get 1.25, 1.3 times better. That's about it. But you can probably overcome this problem of scaling a little bit better if you were to, I don't know, contact your parliamentary representative, like I said, because they can help marshal more forces and more people to do things than you would just do on your own. Or even though this is also kind of annoying, you could try to influence other people through social media or through any other means. And that's also another way of marshaling more forces, more people to help out with this idea. I mean, the whole point is like to more magnify your individual choices so as to get more people to help, right? So what about NGOs or charities, non-governmental organizations? These are actually pretty good at solving the problem of scaling, right? I mean, they have a dedicated staff of professionals whose entire job it is just to make sure that people get fed or children get healed or things like that. And also on top of that, I mean, if you wanted to go help homeless people in Kazakhstan, that's cool, but you're probably not going to be able to do it that well because you have to buy flight tickets to Kazakhstan. And where are you going to stay in Kazakhstan? However, this NGO probably already has connections there and they can do it more efficiently than you can. That's cool. But so there's still a problem though with some NGOs, they can be a bit inefficient. There's some they've said like for every dollar you donate, the actual people you're trying to help only get about 7 cents of it. So 93% of your money is just being thrown down the toilet. And also maybe these are focusing on the wrong thing. But we'll get back to the NGOs in a second. So this is where the concept of effective altruism comes in. The focus of it is that, well, there are some ways that are better, that are more efficient of helping people, and there's also some that are less efficient at helping people. And honestly, reason and numbers and rationality are the best way for us to determine those rather than emotions, because again, our emotions can mislead us. Also, on top of that, one of the main things that the effective altruism movement stands by is saying that NGOs and charities usually do a better job than individuals in helping out. So there's a caveat there. The NGOs have to be quote unquote good NGOs. Like I said, there are some that probably waste, was it 93% of your contribution on administrative costs and blah, blah, blah. But there are others that are actually very efficient and they actually do a much better job. They've actually shown the average difference between good NGOs and bad NGOs is about 100 times in terms of how effective they are compared to the worser ones. And also, in order for an NGO to be considered probably a good one, they should probably focus on the right thing. So, this question of focusing on the right thing, right? There's some things that can probably affect a better change in the world than others. We've already talked about that. But there was this whole concept of the Buy a Brushstroke campaign that happened in Great Britain a couple of years ago. And it was actually a really, really smart campaign. We should probably try to use this in other things that are helpful to, because it was a good way of getting people involved. But the idea was that you can donate money, and on their website, they have this grayed out picture of this blue Rigi painting. And if you donate a certain amount, you get to own 1 pixel on there. And so you can kind of see, and you can mouse over or something like that, and you can see who donated what. And there's sort of a way of putting your personal stamp on there. And people loved it. And 550,000 pounds got donated to help this cause. So the actual cause was that there was this painting, and there was some rich guy who was a private collector, and he was going to buy the painting. And he was going to move it from the UK museum, where it was, into his private collection. And people didn't like that. So that's why they raised 550,000 pounds to make sure that it didn't go to his private collection. So this painting's nice, it's beautiful, but if you think about it, 550,000 pounds, you could have bought better sanitation systems in a developing country. And some people calculate that that money could have saved 1,000 humans. It's a lot of humans. And also, the money would have been spent on this, and this painting still would have existed. It would have gone on. It was just going to be moved from this museum into this guy's private collection. So what's more important? 1,000 breathing, thinking human lives, or keeping a painting in the same place? I don't know. You tell me. So there are a couple of things that we can do to determine what's a useful cause or not. There's a lot of different metrics, but this is just one, for instance, and it's called DALYs or dailies. I don't know how it's pronounced. But it pretty much stands for disability adjusted life years. So it's pretty much like if something bad happens to you, or if you're in a bad situation, how many years off of your expected life total would be subtracted by it. So high DALYs equals bad. So for example, if you're, say, blind in Niger or something, that would decrease your ability to find work, obviously. And if there's no social systems in place, then if you can't work, you can't get food because you don't have money. And you probably die early. And that sucks. But so this is kind of an example of so with this one, you would have a higher amount of DALYs or whatever for being blind in Niger. So this isn't a perfect metric. There's a lot of, problems and edge cases with it, but this is just to illustrate the point that there are some numerical ways that we can tell what's good and what's not. So if we look at maybe treating HIV or AIDS, there's a way that we can look at this here. You know, if you spend $1,000, how many lives, or how many years, sorry, of life can you prolong someone's life, right? So you can spend $1,000 and you can give surgery to people that have Kaposi's sarcoma. Kaposi's sarcoma is a form of cancer that you get after, well, a lot of people who have HIV or AIDS often develop this form of cancer. So you can go and give them surgery to heal that, and that's cool. And you can save lives, but for $1,000, you can't save a lot. Another thing you can do is administer antiretroviral therapies, which are pretty much just a cocktail of different drugs that help stop the spread of HIV, throughout your body. And so you can see for $1,000, you can save maybe 1-2 lives. So that's cool. You can see it's actually more efficient than the other. So we're already having a baseline numerical metric here. Another thing you can do is, you can help keep mothers from accidentally transmitting it to their children through pregnancy. Oftentimes mothers who have HIV or AIDS, when they give birth, the child also gets it because it goes through the birth canal, and that's really bad. So for the same amount of money, you can try to prevent this, and it can add about 5 years to somebody's life, which is also really great. You can see it's more efficient than the others. Or you can just distribute condoms. Distributing condoms is cheap, it's pretty effective, and you can see here for $1,000, you can buy a lot of condoms. And you can help spread the spread of HIV and help stop the spread of HIV, and to further reduce the amount of hours and years lost from somebody's life. Or even more so, you can educate people who otherwise wouldn't have access to this education. And this would, you can see here, this is significantly more useful for each $1,000 spent, right? You can teach people about what birth control is, about sexually transmitted diseases, about sharing needles, how all these different things can be dangerous. And you can see for this small amount of money, you can spread it a lot further and probably add about 27 years to someone's life. So you can see that the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, really kind of holds out. Because you notice that a lot of these that prevent the things in the first place usually are more efficient than curing the problem after the fact. So this problem's a lot tougher than we originally thought. There's a lot of different options out there, and honestly, how do you know what's the right one? I mean, there are a lot of NGOs out there, but how do you know the ones that are focusing on the right things? How do you know the ones that are doing it efficiently? These are all really good questions. And also, what if the landscape shifts? Let's say you start donating to something to stop, to stop cholera in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then after a couple of years, there is no more cholera in the DRC. If you still keep donating to this place, you're kind of wasting your money because the problem is gone. So what do you do if that happens? So that's actually one of the nice things about this effective altruism movement, because they have a fund themselves where you just donate to this fund, and they have researchers working there, and they determine year by year, month by month, what are the most efficient ones to go to and which ones can potentially effect the most good in the world. But so how do they choose the different things to work on, right? Well, they have 3 main things they go by. They say they have to be great in scale, they have to be highly neglected right now, and they have to be highly solvable. So great in scale just pretty much means the more people it would affect, the better. So if you think heart disease is the #1 killer of people in the US. But also, you could focus on that, or you could focus on giving malaria nets to people in tropical regions. Well, there's a lot more people in tropical regions in general than there are people in the US, so probably the malaria one's better. Things that are highly neglected, for instance, these are things that very few people are working on, and so if you were to pour resources into it, you would see a lot of output as a result. If you have something that's super focused on already, if you add $100 to it or whatever, you're only adding a small extra percentage on top of what's already there. So, you kind of get diminishing returns. So they try to find things that are not as donated to, I guess you could say, to find ways to help out there. And also the highly solvable thing means that they usually go for tried and proven methods rather than potential ones that might not. So if you throw in a bunch of money to, giving vitamins to kids that are malnourished, We already know that vitamins work. It's pretty easy. You stuff vitamins in kids' mouths and they keep living for some reason. Or if you deworm children as well, it also helps them live longer rather than trying to find some, research some new technology that doesn't exist, that might be really hard to do, that would potentially wipe out all worms or something like that, So you can see how they kind of come up with their decisions, I guess I would say. So with all this, what is the most effective NGO out there? Does anybody want to take a guess? Resounding silence. That's great. So I was a bit surprised to hear this. The most effective NGO in terms of dollars spent and lives saved is the Against Malaria Foundation. Pretty much all they do is they distribute bed nets to people, and these bed nets have insecticide on them, so people don't get bitten by mosquitoes while they're asleep. That's about it. And it's kind of interesting, though, because you could think of, well, you could spread, you could try to give medicine to people who have malaria, but really, they saw that it costs $4.59 about to buy and distribute a bed net to a family. And you can see here, like 2, maybe 3 people, depending how many people sleep on the bed, would be protected from malaria-infested mosquitoes that night. So, I don't know about you guys, but I don't really like that. I know it sounds weird to say, but when I think about helping people, I think of stopping sex slavery, or children with deformed heads, or these things that are horrible, terrible things that we need to overcome. And this whole thing, bed nets, well, I don't care about bed nets, I want to make a difference. But at the end of the day, I think this is still a problem of our emotions getting in the way of our rationality. And maybe this is a bit controversial, but I dare say that if you're saving a life versus saving a life, you may want to save as many lives as you can. I don't know. So that's what we can do about in terms of, donating to NGOs. But what if you yourself want to actually do something that can help directly, like your career, whatever? That's also a great question. Actually, it's nice to see, though, that there is a foundation called the 80,000 Hours Foundation, and they help you choose a career that can potentially make the most amount of good. They're called 80,000 hours because you're probably expected to work about 80,000 hours in your entire career. You get it. It's clever, I promise. So you can see here how it all works out. And there's some examples of high-impact careers that they talk about. One of them is something that I had never even heard of before I started researching this, is global priorities research. And it's pretty much going into the work of figuring out what are the things that humanity needs to be working on in order to maximize our best output. So if our conversation here is, how do I find the best ways to help people? Like them, they kind of take it one step further in abstraction and say, well, how do we even find the possible subjects, I guess, that would potentially make the most good there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Also, they talk about working maybe in nuclear security, to prevent some sort of all-out nuclear war would be really good. Or new forms of energy, for instance, might be another one. So as Forbes said, even though I really hate presentations where the presenter just reads out to you, I'm going to do that to you right now, so sorry. So as Forbes said about this, if you're a tissue engineer, you could grow clean meat in a lab. Or as a machine learning specialist, you could work to minimize the chances of global catastrophic risks. And as an economist, you could research how to maximize the positive impact of charitable cash transfers. And so this kind of shows that you could go work for an NGO. That's also totally fine, definitely. But if you are trying to maximize your output, there are some things where little movements will actually sway the compass in quite a big way. So these people are pretty cool. If you're interested in them, I'll tell you about them after the presentation. So another thing that we get to whenever we talk about helping out is this concept of long-termism. And I thought this was kind of interesting, and it's kind of counterintuitive, and it's another one of these things that feels sort of wrong, but I can see the point. So the idea is that the future is real big. It's really, really long. Like the Earth itself, assuming that we don't mess it up, is potentially going to remain habitable for another 600 to 800 million years. So if you take about like 27, 28 years per generation, that means there's about 21 million future generations that will happen in the future. And this is even assuming that humanity doesn't start colonizing space and going to other planets. But that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. And so if that's the case, that means there's probably going to be a lot more people that will exist in the future than even exist right now. So we probably want to make sure that they don't have a shitty life. So one thing that you could think about is, well, if we want to head off the possibility of global warming or something like that, we don't want the world to become some horrible charred hellscape that just looks like Mad Max forever, because there's going to be a lot of people throughout the future history of the world that are going to have a really awful life. So it probably would make sense for us not to hurt them. So we should look into it. So there's actually this group of people called the Future of Humanity Institute, which is really interesting and sounds super futuristical, that I kind of like. And they're based in Oxford. And so they pretty much look to figure out what are these huge risks that humanity is like staring down the barrel of, and how do we prevent them? So what exactly are existential risks or threats? So these are just like threats that have the possibility of wiping out humanity, full stop. And so there's different like kind of grades. There's some that like, well, there's something that could just kill humanity. No human is left alive. And that sucks, of course. But honestly, I think it would be even worse if there were to be some kind of bad thing that happens and civilization ends and there's still people left alive, but they're just stuck in a horrible, horrible situation. Like I said, like Mad Max. Because at least if everybody's dead, nobody's going to care anymore. You just won't be around to be sad about the fact that you're not existing. But, you know, if you're still alive and you're like living in just like a desert full of, you know, marauding bandits and violence all the time, that's way worse, I would say. And so what they're trying to do is find different ways that humanity could end. And there's two main ways. There's a way that, you know, we could fuck it up for ourselves, or there's also some things that could happen naturally that, well, not really our fault, but they're still bad. So things like human cause is the idea if we make super intelligent AI that is not really happy with our existence or doesn't have our best interests at heart, and it's way smarter than us, and it could find a way to just, you know, squash us like insects, that might be bad. Or like I said earlier, if there's an all-out nuclear war, that's another thing we could prevent, maybe. That would be our fault. And another one that they put is like one of the real dangerous ones is the idea that, well, people could bioengineer different viruses that could spread and just wreak havoc across the population. And this one's especially becoming dangerous and scary because right now, for about $1,000, you can go on eBay and you can purchase a genetic engineering lab. You can set it up in your garage and you can start editing the genomes of bacterial organisms and stuff like that. And so, you know, anybody could do this. And if somebody's smart and bad, they could really fuck it up for a lot of people. So that's not great. And of course, these naturally caused ones are like an asteroid impact, like what killed the dinosaurs, or maybe a nearby big star goes supernova and just like, I don't know, the cosmic waves that come off it. I'm not an astronomer, but it blows up and it causes bad things. So if we're talking about these existential threats, you know, what are the odds of something like this happening? Well, all right. If we talk about the natural ones, like the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, Chicxulub, the one that hit around the Yucatan Peninsula, they think the odds of something like this big happening in the next 100 years is about 1 in a million. All right. And what about if there were to be a supernova that goes off? That's actually even less likely. So it's about 1 in a billion. That's cool. Or a supervolcano, for instance, like what happened 70,000 years ago. There was this gigantic like volcano in Sumatra that blew up. And even though it was like back when humans were hunter-gatherers, they expect that the human population was reduced down to about around 1,000 humans left. Like that's it in the entire world. And this is actually a lot more likely than, you know, a supernova or an asteroid. It's about 1 in 10,000. So if you combine all these together, what are the possibilities that some really horrible thing will happen? Well, they say like in the worst case, it's about 1 in 200 happening in the next century, or 1 in 2,000 in the best case. All right. And what's the possibility, though, of humans destroying themselves, of us really fucking it up? What are the odds? 1 in 6. So pretty much, you roll a dice. If it lands on 1, you lose. And so you can see that if this is the case, we really have a very bad set of circumstances that we're staring down right now. They can be direct effects, like I said, if there's a full-blown nuclear war and people die from the initial blasts and the nuclear winter happens. That's sad. Also the thing about designer pathogens I mentioned, or unfriendly AI. But there's also indirect effects as well, like climate change is one of these. So if the world continues to heat up, there will probably be more water shortages and food shortages, and countries will start to become probably more aggressive while they're trying to find food resources, and it could lead to more international tensions, which could lead to the aforementioned full-blown nuclear exchange. Hey, fun, fun, fun. So that's also another thing that this Effective Altruism Fund tries to track as well. They have 4 different funds, and one of them here you can see is the Long-Term Future Fund. And that one's trying to suss out these existential threats to humanity and how to prevent them, how to make maybe better international governance so that it's really hard for us to enter a nuclear war or something like that. They also have others, this global health and development is your classic helping starving kids in poor countries. There's also the Animal Welfare Fund, because if you think that animals are capable of feeling, then if you're rational, you should probably care that they're suffering too. And then there's also the Meta Fund as well, which you're basically donating to Effective Altruism directly, telling them like, hey, you guys should do more work and try to figure out more of these ways. So it's like these 3, they funnel your money into other people, and the bottom one, it goes directly to them. And you can choose, it's really kind of nice because you can choose exactly how much of your money is going to go toward what. And yeah, I think for mine, it's I have more on long-term future, slightly less on animal welfare, less on meta, and more on global development. So you can just figure out what you want. But the main question that we should be asking is, can you trust these people? And that's a very good question. And you should be skeptical, because let's be honest, lives are on the line. If you make a less than optimal decision, people will die as a result of it. Unfortunately, that's just the truth of it. So we should try to find the best way to do it if we can. So for me, this is just my personal opinion now. I personally trust them because, well, they don't claim to have all the answers. They're not over here being like, we're so great, we're the best, trust us, give us your cash, So they admit when they're biased. They talk about some of the one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to donate to them potentially, especially they talk about the Meta Fund. They're like, hey, if you don't think, or if you think that there might be a conflict of interest with us, okay, cool, don't donate directly to us. Just donate to the other ones, that's fine. Yeah, they also admit that they don't have all the answers. They say there are a lot of really important stuff that they don't focus on, but it's also useful. And you could donate to other people about these things. They talk about how potentially doing science better could be a very, very high impact thing. If we have more efficient ways of discovering more things, then we can potentially try to help more people. Or if we find a way to make better voting methods, we can make democracies work more efficiently and to further reflect the views of the people and stuff like that. So, that's all cool. Also, the thing that I do like about them is that they are pretty humble. They show the mistakes that they have made in the past and the corrections to them. And it's on this big page. And you can just go through and see all the ways they fucked up, and they're just totally open about it. And also, they do show you every year what they donate to and what their pick for the most efficient, NGO and stuff like that is. So for those reasons, I think they're all right. Is there a better one out there? There could be. And if I find it, I'd be happy to change my opinion and go to those. But yeah, so there's one final concept, is this idea of earning to give. So we were talking about how it's really not too bad of a thing to make a lot of money if you're willing to donate a lot of it to a charity that can really help out, as gross as that feels morally. But this idea is that you can give yourself a maximum salary, more or less. So you can say maybe the median salary of the country you live in, or maybe more, whatever, it's your choice. Like we said, Not trying to make anybody feel bad here. But yeah, you give yourself this maximum ceiling, and anything you make above that, you just donate the rest. So you could say like, well, I'm going to cap my salary at, I don't know, 50,000 crowns a month or whatever. And if I happen to make 100,000, then well, everything above 60 just gets donated. And so as a result, if you get promoted, you get raises, like you still keep trying to climb the corporate ladder, you know, be the best programmer or PM or designer or HR rep that you can, and keep getting, you know, promotions and stuff like that. But everything else you make just goes to donations. So that's cool. But if that's a bit too extreme, there's also other ways. I mean, you can just donate 1% of your salary. You know, some people donate 5%, some people donate 10, whatever. And of course, if you get a promotion, you're still donating 5%. So if your salary goes up, well, the amount that you're donating still ends up going up, even though it's only 5%, because it's 5% of a bigger number, right? But the best part about all this is that you don't have to be a self-righteous prick about any of it. You can just silently donate your cash away. You don't have to tell anybody, and you don't have to think that you're so much better than everybody else, and you don't have to give yourself a bad name. So I think this one is actually a pretty effective one because any of us could do it. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. In conclusion, we could probably all agree that it's good to help people, of course, but I would make the case that our feelings can be very misleading. And in fact, rationality is probably a better way to go to determine these things. People have said that science can't tell us what we should focus on. It can only tell us the best way to get there. And I agree with that. I think we can decide for ourselves what's the best way, like the best thing to focus on, or what we find to be moral good. And then science can help us achieve that moral good best, or rationality can as well. Yeah. The nice thing about this effective altruism fund is that they take a lot of the guesswork out of it. You just donate to them, they do all the heavy lifting. That's nice. If you want to go into a high impact career, you can talk to these 80,000 hours people, and they also have a website with tons of information that you can look on. Or you can also donate a set percent of your income. You know, even like 5% is really great. It's better than what most people are doing. And so the thing that brought this up to me was when we did the Ask Me Anything with Matt a couple of weeks ago. And we were talking about something about the charity budget. And honestly, I think that our emotions probably get in the way with a lot of these, but I think there is a rational choice of what would be the best place for us to donate to. And well, even if it's not all of it, we can look into a possibility of donating a portion of it. So that's everything. Thanks, guys.